Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 66 of the Watch Rolling Podcast. The Watch Rolling Podcast is a veteran-owned podcast that focuses on horology from a veteran's perspective, as well as sharing valuable veteran resources with the watch enthusiast community. My name is Jason. I'm your host. If you're new to the pod, welcome. And if you're returning, welcome back. Episode 66 is a special episode. It's brought to you by the Anti-Watch Watch Club. The Anti-Watch Watch Club is a 501c3 charity that utilizes a drop-style culture to support all kinds of charities for veterans, first responders, law enforcement. They sell cool stuff like the flag you see behind me, T-shirts, Nalgene bottles, all that stuff. 100% of the proceeds go to these charities, and no one draws a salary. Great. Check them out, antiwatchclub.org. A great group of stuff. I highly recommend the Nalgene bottles for when you work out. They're just handy little bottles, and they're good to go. Today's episode is a special episode again. I think you can tell that I've been on a roll with interviews. Episode 66 is going to be an interview with the gentleman Daniel Joseph from combatpsych.com. Daniel was an Army officer with an interesting civilian career before the Army, like most of us, and I think an even more interesting career after the Army. But there's going to be some lessons learned from the Army and directly relating to a book he wrote and his combatpsych.com website. So without further ado, let's get Dan on the podcast.
Hey,
Welcome to the Watch Rolling Podcast, Dan. How you
what's
doing?
up? Good to
Not
be here,
much, man.
man.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Yeah.
So how was your
So,
day today? Pretty good?
yeah, it was good, man. It was good. I was excited to get on with you. Our initial call was, we
Yeah.
clicked right away. So
Yeah.
I'm pumped. So yeah,
Yeah,
kind of.
I think it's a SoCal connection. I try to tell people all the time, man. Like we're pretty amicable people. I think I might be generalizing, but I haven't met too many people from home that I don't really get along with. I mean, there's people that we don't maybe necessarily vibe right away, but for the most
Yeah.
part, just tend to be pretty relaxed and get along. But welcome to the podcast, Dan. I did a brief intro for you. I don't know if you heard it or not, but
Mhm.
just tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your background, how you ended up to this point.
Yeah. So just got out of the army less than a year ago. And I was a combat engineer in a non-deployable unit. I was working with basically training units on deployment with the Joes. So we did a lot of desert ops, things of that sort, convoy movements out there, building obstacles. Operating as engineers, we were enablers for everyone else. So to get the mission sets um, honed in on whether it's defensive or offensive attacks, we can get into it if you want, but yeah, anyway, so like a lot of war gaming type stuff. And then while I was in the military, I worked on a master's in psychology just because COVID had shut things down. And so things were slow. And I thought best way to use the time is at least, work on a degree right now. Everything was going remote anyway. So um, I picked an organizational psych degree because I thought it would serve me as a leader to be a better leader to the Joes. Just being able to study myself, study what optimal leadership looks like from a psychological perspective. I have a background in cell bio, so I like to tie in the neurophysiology of the brain to that as well. Get super geeked out on the science, but what it looks like on the outside is just being a good leader, being well balanced, listening to the guys and whatnot. And so I'm sure we'll get into this, but I've had a long journey through my own issues, my own ego. Jiu-jitsu did a lot to break my pride and humble me in a big way. And I've been mentored by some brilliant military leaders, officers, and enlisted from all branches. And that's what I wrote my book about. Essentially, when I got out of the army, one of my Joes, he survived his suicide attempt, and his name's Cody. He's still alive and well. I keep in touch with him, and yeah, it really impacted me. Talking to his mom on the phone, letting her know that we were going to get him help, and uh, yeah, it definitely changed my perspective on a lot of things. I was so grateful to that he survived, that he is alive, right? But I
Yeah.
have so many friends who know people who aren't alive, and my so Cody actually wrote the intro to the book. The foreword of the book was written by Austin, one of my best buds in the army. And at the time I wrote the book, 12 men from his unit committed suicide after
Oh, wow.
Afghanistan. And after publishing the book, the 13th individual killed himself. So, and I still check in on Austin because, he's struggled as well. And
Yeah.
I mean, we all do. We're all humans, right? So, what the military taught me, and I'll kind of stop after this, is just the brotherhood doesn't end, when you get out as veterans and
Yeah.
whatnot. It's important to keep checking in on each other, loving on each other. And yeah, man. So right now I'm just kind of talking to people about this book. You're one of the first people I'm reaching out to about it.
Oh,
Took me a
thanks.
while to get over the nerves of
Yeah.
saying all the stuff that I did about myself. I exposed quite a bit about myself. And yeah, man, it's out there now. So here we are.
No, yeah, and I read
Yeah.
the, the free sample. Like I told you, I'm gonna pick up a copy later. But it was really, it's easy. I've discussed this before, and I've had other veterans on, and just by shooting the stuff, but it's easy to really get insular with this stuff, right? Like,
Yeah.
everyone's situation's different. I know you talk about it in your book where, there's different experiences with relations to combat and operations and what you do and who's seen what, and but like I always tell people, um, there's more civil service type jobs in the military than people think that still have a significant level of danger based on what you do. I always go back to my experience with being a shipboard engineer. Like I tell people, like, you're on a giant metal box that wants to kill you, and it wants to kill you like 50 different ways. Electricity, fuels, lube oils, you know what I mean? Like just climbing up and down escape trunks. I mean, 8 deck vertical ladders. Like there's all this stuff, right? And you can even be like an office person sitting in an office. You got steam pipes going through your space. You got, you know what I mean? All this crazy stuff. And so you never know what a fellow veteran's carrying, what they've, experienced, what they've had. And so checking in on your buddies that as a friend group is so important because a lot of times you're usually buddies with people that have had a similar career experience. Not always, but usually a similar career experience. So um the understanding between the group is there, and then a simple phone call or a simple text can be pretty good and
Yeah.
do wonders for you. But speaking of your book, Dan, so the book is Backpack to Rucksack.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's the book. And tell us a little bit about the book and the whole idea behind it. Like, just summarize it, I guess, for us, and we can go on from there.
Yeah. So the subtitle of the book is Insight into Military or Insight into what is it, Leadership and Resilience by Military Experts. So
Yep.
I forgot my own subtitle, but
No, it's
essentially
okay.
the book is about a bunch of mentorship that I received from folks, from guys who are, like I said, from all different branches. So buddies of mine who are on the SEAL teams, a MARSOC, Marine, um, a Green Beret. There's EODs in there, rescue swimmers, fighter pilots, helo pilots. One guy in the Navy flew Sierras. Actually, two of them are in the book. And anyway, so it's a group of people that inspired me before I joined the military. They actually inspired me to join, but they inspired my style of leadership. They are super humble people. They're super grounded. They're encouragers. They're positive people. They're aggressive. They're assertive. They have all these healthy characteristics, psychologically speaking, that for a lot of my life I envied and I didn't have. And as I got to know them, I sought out friendship with them, and they kind of took me under their wing, and each individually mentored me on a different aspect of life. So I wrote about that. I wrote about how they're what I like to call them is like a mosaic of
Mhm.
role models that together make up the ideal brother or father. There's that connection that I have with them that I didn't really feel I had younger in my life. And it fed my soul, and then you
Yeah.
throw in jujitsu with that, right? The physicality of things. It just became there's a lot of primal energy to it. It was something where I lived so much of my life cerebrally, I was in my head, in my thoughts. I still struggle with that. I'm hugely an introvert in a lot of ways, but these guys kind of pulled me out of myself, got me on the mats. They got me running mountains. They got me rucking. They got me swimming in the ocean. They got me doing things that were so outside of my comfort zone. And, after a few years of that, I eventually signed a contract at 32 years old to join the military. And yeah, man, I went to a non-deployable unit. Kind of bummed about that because I did want to go overseas, and
Yeah.
but it's all right because we all have our journey, and so what happened is I developed some really close relationships with combat vets. I was working alongside some amazing people that I would consider heroes, and I always say that they'd cringe at that word. They wouldn't want me to call them that, but they're giants in my eyes, and I started to realize how much weight that they carried from war, from
Yeah.
not just it's so complex, man. Yeah, the killing and being shot at and being blown up obviously leaves huge scars physically and psychologically, but then there were complexities of leadership, complexities of home, dynamics at home, stuff that they brought into the military that happened in childhood that just compounded it, right? And so I began to appreciate, especially as I worked on myself through jujitsu, getting pummeled, getting beat up, getting my ego broken, learning so much about myself. Dude, I started looking at them differently, seeing
Mm,
the layers. Because as I dug through the layers of my life, it allowed me to have vocabulary and an awareness to describe the layers that other people have. And
yeah,
that essentially was my value to these combat vets, was getting to have these private discussions with them about stuff that they've seen, stuff that they've been through, stuff that they've done in war that they've never really talked to other people about. And they've given me permission to share some of their stories. This book isn't like loaded with their stories. There's a few of them here and there, so I don't want to overhype this or anything. But the fact that they trusted me to share little pieces of what they've gone through, um, in order for them to heal, to get that off of their
yeah,
chest, I felt compelled to help them further. And so this book especially is to help new leaders. Like if you're a new officer or you're somebody who wants to go in the military as an officer, um, you definitely need to learn about how to speak to people and how to treat them even when you have rank. And if you're somebody who's in the military, especially on like the senior enlisted side, and we can have these discussions about both, the
yeah,
the the E versus O sides of the house, right? But um it's so important to understand that the way we treat people in uniform, it touches upon all these invisible all this invisible weight that they carry. And so I'm kind of developing this concept in my mind of everybody having a rucksack on their back of
yeah,
emotions and feelings and experiences. And some people have massive rucks, other people have smaller rucks, right? But we
yeah,
don't know, like in the military, in the army, we all have one ruck, right? It's all the same looking ruck.
yeah,
But we can have different weights. Some guys can pack 30 pounds and that's it. Other people might be packing 180 pounds. Who knows? Um, Now when we do a timed ruck, yeah, it's uniform. Like you have to put it on the scale and weigh it after the ruck because they don't want you cheating and dropping weight. Anyway, but what I'm saying is in life though, we don't know what people are carrying, and as a leader, it's so important not to aggravate a pre-existing issue and to be a leader who can allow people to heal, allow people to decompress, and and trust you to have their best interest at heart, not just use them to get ahead and to build your image or your OER or
yeah.
whatever it is. And it's so much easier said than done. And again, I wrote this book not because I have the answers, but because I want to have the discussion.
No,
And
you're
that's
right.
why I talk to you about having that senior enlisted discussion with new officer discussion. Like it's just so cool to share that wisdom. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's so cool and it's so needed to help preserve sanity in the military, especially with suicidality going the way it is and whatnot.
yeah. No, no, I know exactly. And reading your book and you bringing up the senior enlisted to, I have so many stories about that, even as a junior guy. But like when I was in Iraq, I worked in a joint unit, and our division officer, what we would call him, was a captain in the Air Force at the time. He recently retired. He's my good friend Paul. He knows where he is. Shout out Paul. But he was a captain at the time, and
Mm-hmm.
so he shows up, and I don't know what you guys call in the Army. I think you call it formation. We call it quarters in the Navy, right? So we're having quarters, and Paul comes in. He comes wandering in, and so it's we have an Army specialist. We got a Army second lieutenant, and a bunch of Navy guys. And he walks in, and he's doing quarters, and he turns to me and calls me Jason. He calls me by my first name, right? And we're the only two standing up there. So I just let it go. Then after quarters, I'm like, "Hey, sir, can we talk outside in the hallway real quick?" He's like, "Yeah." And we go outside. I'm like, "Don't ever call me by my first name in front of the guys again." And I said, "Let me tell you why." And I explained to him, because in the Navy we have a separate thing where we go through chief's initiation, blah 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 blah. There's a distinct thing, but it's steeped in tradition for being on board a ship because that's a much different life, right? When you're underway for X amount of days, there needs to be a clear delineation. And we chiefs, like, we were all enlisted, junior enlisted at one time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we get to talk, the good ones get to talk to their people, get to know what motivates them, knows about where they're from, what's going on in their life to an extent, right? And paying real close attention to personalities, knowing when someone's off. And most of us that are worth a, walk around all day and hit job sites and are like, "Hey, what's going on? Blah, 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 blah. Hey, how's the baby doing?" Oh, and sometimes and it's crazy. They'll be like, "Chief, man, we're struggling with bills. I'm like, well, do you know about this program? Or we go
Mhm.
back, I backfill like the E6, like, yo, you need to talk to so and so because they're having some stuff, right? Or maybe you walk by and you hear something. And but then Captain, Paul, he was really good about that. I watched him after that. Like he'd walk around and talk to the guys. Like he knew who was from where and what they did. And like he even learned like what the army guy really did. And he learned about the Navy rates and stuff. And I'll never forget like years later, he's a lieutenant colonel. And he tells me, he's like, man, I really wish that our service did what you chiefs do in the Navy because I don't see it as much in the Air Force.
Mm.
And I told him, I said, well, it's something that you can incorporate, but it's very specific to a ship. And
Mm.
then when we were talking about that, it reminded me of a junior officer I had on my first ship when I was in E1. We had a lieutenant, he was a nuclear officer. And so he wouldn't be down very much because he's trying to get his qualifications on the ship and everything. But
Mm.
long story short, when he did come down, he would go like watch maintenance being done by those of us that did it. And at first we thought he was just trying to watch us, but in reality, he was talking to us the whole time, like, where are you from? Blah, 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 blah.
Mm.
Oh, he's like, and he would
Cool.
do little stuff like, I really appreciate the way you're reading your maintenance card and following the rules, blah, blah. And then when you saw him again, like a couple weeks later, because he would disappear getting these qualifications, he'd be like, oh, how's that maintenance going on this? Or, how's your family in California? And
Mm.
you were like, man, when you get older, you're like, this dude was a really good officer.
Mm.
And I didn't realize it when I was like a E2 or E1.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So that's something good I got from reading part of your book too.
Awesome.
Was that something you like inherently knew when you started in the army, or was that something that was taught to you from
Um,
like maybe a senior officer or a senior NCO?
maybe a little bit of both, because a lot of dude, you got to be authentic as a leader. You got to let it might bother some people, but you got to be yourself. And I'm
Yeah,
a talker. I love getting to know people, and even as an introvert, yeah, I just when I initially meet people, there's an excitement where I want to know who they are, what makes them tick, and especially in the military when things suck, when the environment sucks, dude, all you have is each other. So you
yeah,
gotta rely on that. But I have to say that there are a couple of friends of mine who some of the first guys I met. Uh, and that I wrote in the book, and I'm trying to remember to like change their names because I don't. I wrote for because some of them are still active duty,
yeah,
but there's a couple Navy SEALs who really mentored me and taught me how they interact with their guys and how approachable they have to be, right, and how real they have to be with them. And that was the coolest thing ever, that team guy concept. And then one of my really good buddies, Will, he's the MARSOC operator. He's got the same heart, super humble guy. Um, didn't have to ever, I talk about this in the book, never had to like overcompensate or act tough. He knew who he was. You know what I mean? He didn't need to prove anything. And then my other buddy, Jazz, he's an artillery officer in the Marine Corps. Same concept, just close to the guys, living in the field. He, said never live better than the Joes, than the guys around you. Don't,
mhm,
as an officer, have a higher standard than they do if you're in the field. I get it's different on a ship, but
yeah,
when you're out there in the desert, it's important that you don't try to separate yourself too much from the guys because they see everything, man. You're living in a fishbowl. But I just loved hanging out with the dude. I love hanging out with privates, man. I love talking to the E1s, E2s, and I know it bothered some people, and this is why I was kind of offline when we were chatting about some people said, hey, I don't like it. I don't see officers do that. Officers aren't supposed to go talk to those guys and be that comfortable about it. Because I talked to them like they were like brothers of mine. Do you know what I'm saying? Like we're
yeah,
siblings, and that bothered some people. And I think it bothered some who maybe didn't have that capacity, just didn't feel like maybe they wanted to connect, but they couldn't.
yeah,
But I understand that some NCOs were like, hey, that's could be seen as like disrespectful to us because it's chain of command, right? But then there's others who would argue, no, dude, you're letting the guys speak up. You're letting them know that you care. Um, Suicide was a thing during the lockdowns,
yeah,
especially, right? And I didn't want to lose a guy. I wrote it on my wall, on my board in my office. Like my goals as a leader, and number one was never lose a soldier.
yeah,
And they came in like, sir, what is that? Because I let my guys in the office, which also bothered people. Because like, why do you do that? Why do you let list the guys in the office? I'm like, dude, what? Anyway, so they come in and they're just like, why'd you write that? Never lose a soldier. And I'm like, I got serious, you know, I get emotional, you know, you ask my
Yeah.
friends, I definitely wear my heart on my sleeve. But I told them, I said, guys, I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not gonna say, I don't want to give a stupid order or push the envelope on our convoy movements at night or in our training that gets you guys killed or hurt, you know, because I'm responsible to their parents. You know, if
Yeah.
one of my guys dies, you know, I'm answering to his mom and dad. You know, what did I do? What order did I give? What could I have done differently? Because I know that's what I'd be thinking of. You know, like my brother's a Marine. If he died in combat, I'd want to know everything. Who told him to go be there? Who, like, could you have mitigated his life being lost? You know, and so I thought of my guys like that, right? And the girls. There's females in the platoon as well, and um, yeah. I mean, I don't want to get too emotional about it, but like, it just, dude. Like a lot of the guys came from rough backgrounds, man.
Yeah.
You know, rough violence, dude. A lot of violence.
Yeah.
Getting shot at, um, dude, just crazy stuff. And so these are the soldiers that made up my platoon. You know, all different races, all different
Yeah.
backgrounds, all different socio. It's just a socioeconomic like amalgamation of everybody in America all in one platoon. It was so cool. But I was inspired to get to know them and inspired to be close to them and keep my finger on the pulse because if mental health wavered, yeah, it wavered a lot.
Yeah.
You know, and things got rough, and so I was maybe overcorrecting. And again, that's why I wrote this book to find out
Yeah.
what technically is healthy leadership, what's ideal leadership. But I wanted to hear from them, from their mouths. Like,
Yeah.
how are you doing? What's going on? How's your family? How's your kids? Do you have anything you're aspiring to outside the military? Is there anything else that's driving you that you're passionate about? Dude, that's like, whew, that's so
Yeah.
important because that keeps you sane, man. Especially in austere desert environments.
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff that keeps you going, you know?
Yeah. No, and I think you hit a lot of nails in the head there, but the first one I'd like to talk about is, you know, it's always funny who has a problem with different pay grades like talking to people, right?
Mm,
Because to me it's like, well,
yeah,
there's a fine line with everything we do in the military, right? So like uh,
always.
one of our officers, I don't have any problem with them talking if they're like asking the guys how things are going and et cetera, et cetera. You know, my problem is when the officer would jump me to execute work, right? But you
Yeah,
have to trust that the officer will know that, right?
right.
And so, I'd walk by and catch. We call him the damage control assistant. I'd catch he or she talking to a sailor, and just be standing there, and they're like, "Oh yeah, so I'm glad your family's doing good." Blah 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 blah. Yeah, no problem whatsoever. You know, and then sometimes even in a situation where someone's got to get done quickly, right? They're like, "Hey, or they backfill you. They're like, "Hey, I had to have so and so do this." You're like, "Cool." You know what I mean? I'll just
Mm,
follow up with them. It's the situations are so fluid, but what you don't
yes.
want to do is eliminate any opportunity for it's so funny, man, because you'll hear senior officers or whatever be like, "Oh, the troops don't think that we care." Well, it's like you're
Mm,
kind of reinforcing that by not allowing your junior officers to engage with them. You
mm,
know, you know what I mean? Like, it,
yeah.
you don't have to as an O 06 go talk to the E5, but I have no problem with the O 02 shooting the stuff with the E5 in a work capacity, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know what I
Yep.
mean? As long as they're not going into a business deal together, I think we're okay. You know what I mean? But if so and
Yeah.
so's asking about so and so's family, or
Right.
maybe the E5 is interested in getting commission one day. Maybe that's what they're
Hmm.
talking. Like, what are they supposed to do? Not talk to them about it? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
it's especially when you say like you're stuck in a desert environment, you're in the middle of nowhere.
Mm,
But I don't think that's any different than being stuck in like a ravine in a jungle or being stuck in an engine room on a ship, right? Like,
mm,
what are we going to do? Sit there with our thumbs up our butts the whole time and not? I mean,
yeah.
it's human nature, right?
Right.
And then if you're a leader like you and you want to give back, well, that requires conversation. That
Mm,
requires discussion. You know what I mean? And sometimes you have to pull stuff from people because sometimes they're intimidated by the rank on your collar.
yeah.
Sometimes you got to fill out the room. You're like, hey, I heard you talking about commissioning programs. Is that something you'd be interested in talking to me
Mm,
about? And they're like, oh yeah, sir, because I would have asked you, but I was worried. Blah 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 blah.
right.
And then that helps
Yeah,
senior
man.
leaders like senior enlisted like me say, if you pull me aside one day, you're like, Chief, yeah, if any of the guys are interested, any of the troops are interested in getting commissioned, you know, have them come talk to me. I have no problem.
Mm.
Cool. Now I know, like, hey, any of you whack jobs want to go talk to the lieutenant about getting commissioned. You know what I mean? He said,
Mm.
by all means, schedule an appointment or something like that. I think it's important.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah. I
like,
always,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
No, you're good.
I was saying I always push my guys to like pursue education too. I'm like, go to college, take online classes, because things could get slow in the military or mundane, repetitive. And I always encourage them, like, hey, your future's worth it, man. Invest
Yeah,
in yourself, enrich yourself, because you're going to make the army smarter. If you guys get smarter, you get your college degrees, then the whole organization benefits. And so, yeah, just letting them know there are resources if you need them. And I was big on that. Get to the
yeah,
education center, tap your tuitions assistance, start getting that,
yeah,
just so they have something to look forward to that's not just the job,
yeah.
and
No,
I
you're
wanted to see that.
100% right. Like I mentioned to a lot of people, especially, because I tend to deal with more senior enlisted people. But if I know anyone's getting out, like within 2 or 3 years, I tell them, like, stop and think about what you'd really want to do.
Mm.
Like, if you had a dream job when you get out, and then be honest with yourself about what it's going to take to do that, and then start working early. Like, if you want to be a brain surgeon, I'm pretty sure you just can't roll out of the Navy and go into brain surgery. Um, but if you want to be like a lion tamer, maybe that's a shorter path, and you can go, spend 6 weeks being a lion tamer or something. You know what I mean? Um, did you notice that a difference between any of your soldiers that actually pursued education and those that didn't, as far as their mental health went or general well
um,
being?
I think that the ones who did were more, yeah, I mean, they had like intrinsic motivation is what they call it in psychology. Like they were self starters. They did have more, yeah, I mean, because when we talked about what they were pursuing, they'd light up. They were excited to talk about, because we're not talking about vehicle maintenance. We're not talking about when the next formation is. It was about, hey, by the way, how's school going? And then they get to rant and talk about what they love. So yeah, it
Yeah,
was great. Some of them, tried to do school and then got discouraged. They got stressed out from work, or they felt maybe unsupported by certain people. And so I definitely doubled down on reinforcing the fact that if you're my soldier, then you're absolutely supported in pursuing an education. Like, because it's funny, and you know how leadership is, bro. Somebody comes in with one type of personality, sets a standard, right? Then
yeah,
somebody else comes in, totally
yeah,
different. And then everyone's sort of like, is it okay now? Is this all right? So like you said, you got to tell them like, hey, this is okay with me. This stuff is okay. I encourage this. And so that was important to do. Um, and so, yeah, I advise any leader going in, when you follow your heart and you want to do something for those that you're leading, yeah, be vocal about it. Let them know that it's supported. I didn't really understand this. I didn't understand how important it was at first, because I, I, I guess I expected to just have to fall in line, in the
mhm,
military, because that's kind of how we're indoctrinated, I guess. But um, realistically, as a leader, you get to change things. You get to make changes. And I know there's a lot of resistance, and this could be everything we're talking about could be a massive discussion, because
yeah,
can you really change it? It's a huge
yeah,
ship with a tiny rudder, right?
yeah,
But within your sphere of influence, there's little things you can change. And if you can make it 1% better for the guys you're leading, um, it's totally worth it. It's
yeah,
totally worth it. And the worse the situation, the more that 1% stands out, the higher the contrast of that. And
yeah,
so and that's again part of why I wrote this book. Like, how much was I supposed to change? How much was I supposed to actually impact the military as an O2? Because I got out after 3.5 years. So, what else could I have done for them?
yeah.
What,
I'll
what,
tell you
what
what,
could I have
bro.
done
Between
better?
between me and you, um, it's almost impossible to quantify. You know what I mean? Because it's like
Totally is. You're right.
it's. I
I'll
mean, you
never
could
know.
have a
None of us will.
conversation for 5 minutes, man, for 5 minutes, and you might have just passed that soldier,
Mhm.
and you may never see he or she again. And 3 years down the road, they're like, man, when I talked to that lieutenant, it clicked. And they go, let's just say they stay in, and they have like a company, or they have a platoon, and they positively affect 10 of those people, and those 10 of those people take that little nugget, man, that little
Yeah,
nugget you gave them, and it's a mantra for them, or something that they add to
it's
their
so cool.
quote unquote toolbox. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
It's happened to me, and I've had people, man, bro, I've been like in the exchange, like you guys call it the post exchange, we call it the Navy exchange.
Mm.
And I was at an inspection command for 3 years once, where every week I was going to a different ship inspecting engineering stuff. I've had people come up to me to this day. Hey, were you so and so? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, man, I was an E3 on that ship, and that guy's an
Mm.
E8 now. And he's like,
Wow,
when I
dude.
And he told me, he goes, when I messed up that evolution and you didn't chew me out, but you showed me how to do it correctly.
Oh, that's awesome.
He goes, you
That's
made
so
me
cool.
want to be a trainer, right? And you forget, because I've been retired for a hot minute. You know what I mean? Like, you forget, and I'm like, oh, thanks, man. I'm so glad you're doing well, and blah 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 blah. You know what I mean? Like, and not blah 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 in a bad way, just like, man. And it's the opposite end of the coin is the same. You can lose your temper, you could lose your patience,
Yep.
you could be prideful in a moment, and that could have the other reaction for a person down the road, and they see you and they're like, "F that guy,"
Yeah.
kind of thing. You know what I mean? So I think asking the questions are good.
Yeah.
Like asking the question, could I have done more? Could I have done more? But I think, like, if you really put your heart into it when you served, you've done more good than you could ever possibly quantify. It's it's man, it's mind boggling, but at the same time, it's humbling, right? Because you're
Mm.
like, you at the end of the day, if you gave what you could or not. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
You
man.
know,
Trying to
it's
move mountains, bro. Trying to move
yeah,
mountains is a tough gig.
yeah.
But
So, speaking of, like, because I think it teaches humility, but speaking of humility, so you talk about jujitsu a lot,
yeah.
and I know that's a very specific physical thing to do.
Mm.
And I know for some people it's much more than just physical. But do you think there's a correlation between, like, because I've never done jujitsu, but I've read a lot about it, and
Mm.
most fighting sports, there's more thinking involved than people think.
Yeah.
But do you think there's a correlation between, like, a combined mental and physical approach to
Yeah, dude.
wellness and mental health?
Totally. So it's hard not to see that, especially at the gym I'm at. So I go to Victory, and that's where Jocko Willing's at. And so there's a lot of amazing coaches there. Dean Lister is one of my favorite coaches, and he's there at the gym. And so talk about mindset. It's incredible rolling with team guys and just some awesome folks in the Navy and the Marine Corps. Um, it totally ties together because it teaches you humility. It teaches you how to stay calm. It teaches you how to, be aware of your body, be aware of your injuries, be aware of your flexibility, what you can handle, your stress levels, your breath control. I mean, all this stuff. It's so in psychology they call it interoception. How well you're able to feel what's going on in your inner world. And jujitsu gets you in touch with your body, man, in a very special way. Um, and it's like three-dimensional chess. The
Yeah.
technique. So if you're a white belt, you learn a move, and it's like these are the four steps to execute this choke or this arm bar, whatever it is. Then you go to they call it the lab, like where black belts will show up, and they'll kind of be all these black belts together going over a sequence, right? So they'll go over that like that white belt move, right? But what was a four-step move for us white belts would be a 40-step move for the black belts. They'd
Hmm.
go into such depth and such precision and granularity with all the movements, to just sharpen that move and make it that much more lethal, that much more impactful. And this is all mindset stuff. I mean, they teach us all the time on the mats. Everything we're educating you on here, it translates off the mats. It translates in the world. When we teach you how to control your ego and use the appropriate amount of strength on a move. I call it throttling the violence. You throttle the violence from, just a gentle push to like you're straight up trying to take a guy's head off, right?
Yeah.
You apply that in an altercation in the business world or in the military. If you have someone who wants to fight you and they're squaring up on you, and I talked about this on another podcast
Yeah.
where I had somebody squaring up on me with fists balled up, and I knew exactly what was going on. I'd totally be down for the sparring sesh. Like it's not a huge. I'm not saying like, oh, I'm this awesome like fighter. I'm really not. I'm a huge softie. But in that moment, I felt thanks to the black belts and all the instructors that we have and all the sparring. I'm not that scared of a one-on-one fight. Not like I used to be. And so in that moment, though, I was aware of my breath. I was aware of my ego. I was aware of my distance with this individual. I was aware that their primal system was revved up. Their fight flight response was revved up way more than mine because I could see that he was breathing in his upper chest and I could take a deep belly breath. These are all things you learn in jujitsu, right? But here it was applied in the military, like in the field, about to potentially get in a fight with somebody over some issue about uniforms. And yeah, okay, that brought me back. So yeah, so jujitsu is it's a deep journey because you have to face yourself too. That's the other
Yeah.
thing. It's a mirror, bro. The mats don't lie. So if you're pissed off, if you're angry, if you're scared, if you're whatever your feeling is, it comes out on the mats in those rolls. It's in your body. And it's cool because you got to sit with yourself at night and think about, I mean, you think about the roles. You think about that dude choking you out or how you almost choked that one guy out, but then, oh, dude, he accidentally elbowed me. And then I just saw red and I freaked out and I got so angry and emotional and I forgot my technique. Versus another time where it's like, yeah, I got basically punched in the eyeball or like kneed in the teeth and I crushed that move. I
Mhm.
executed it perfectly because I took a breath, I shook it off, didn't let my adrenaline spike. Those are days where I'll look in the mirror and be like, who's this guy? Like, how did
Yeah.
I become, and my Joes would see it too. They'd be like, hey, sir, like clearly you rolled because, I'd show up to work just pumped, man. It affected my mental health. And I know a lot of veterans swear by it, man. Keeps them
Yeah.
alive.
I know a guy who's he he was active duty, then he went reserves, and he's a warrant officer now in the Navy, an engineering warrant officer, and one of the most calm guys ever. And so one day I noticed, I think over the course of like 6 months, I was like, Ben, what's going on with your ears? I'm like, you fighting? And he goes, oh yeah, man, I've been doing jujitsu, right?
Nice.
And Ben is like
Yeah.
freakishly tall, right? I'm talking like 6'4", 6'5". And I told him, I said, bro, that's a problem. He goes, what do you mean? I'm like, man, you're long, man. You're long. I could see the, just arms and legs, and he's like, man, it's so good. It's so calming. And but it's apparent, right? Because the job he did was stressful, but he never lost it. In plenty of situations he could have, lost his
Mhm.
temper. No, always calm, cool, collected, worked towards a solution. If there was a problem, okay, it's an obstacle, let's get around it, let's go through it, let's
Yep.
go around it, whatever we got to do. And I mean, I respected the guy right away, kind of, but I mean, I respected him more watching because
Mm.
I've noticed for me, um, all the injuries and stuff. I still work out, but I always joke around like an individual will never kick their ass like another person will kick their ass. And another person kicking your ass is far more humbling than me just beating the crud out of myself for 45 minutes in a
Yep.
gym. I can make myself
Yeah.
tired, but I can't make myself think about life.
Mm.
And when someone's got your back, or you know what I mean, like
Yep.
someone's got you in a compromising position, you instantly are in some way you're like, oh man, okay, okay, you know,
Or you're trusting them with your life in their
yes,
hands. Once you get choked out by somebody, I mean, dude, that's your brother, you
yeah,
know, because
yeah,
you just feel that primal connection. It's a tribe. Because who are you going to trust on the street to do that, right?
yeah,
But here you are in a group of these guys you don't even know the dude, and if he holds on for a few more seconds, you're passing out, and if he
yeah,
holds on for a few more seconds after that, you're dead potentially, right? So,
yeah.
and yet choke after choke after choke, you're just going back, and it's cool. It's addicting, man.
Yeah. So I mean, as far as like mental well being and all that, and the stuff that we're
Yeah.
discussing, so we've talked about some education, using your brain,
Mhm.
jujitsu, some physical stuff, but also using your brain. Is there anything else that you've kind of ran across that you think, because not everyone wants to be super physical, not everyone wants to be super mental.
Mm.
Are there any other areas that you've noticed in your studies, or doing your thesis or writing your book, that are some areas that maybe people don't think about that can be
So, like for
centering, I
mental health
guess?
specifically,
Yeah.
yeah. So just looking at the soldiers that I knew, I mean, some of them, dude, there's so many different types of soldiers. Some of them were into art, some were into music, some were into investing crypto, which is insane when you see like a 20-year-old Joe with a Maserati. They made a killing during the Robin Hood
Robin.
thing with like GameStop. So many
Yeah.
soldiers, just like yeah. Um, Yeah, they have all different. There's different ways of doing it, and the main thing is authenticity. Stay authentic and stay genuine to yourself because I believe, I mean, your brain, your heart will lead you toward what helps you decompress. The issue is when people feel so crushed by those around them or by the environment where they forget who they are. They lose sight
Yeah.
of who they are. It's like, dude, remember who you were before you put on the uniform. Um, or like for me, I had to remember who I was before the alcohol in college. I was 17 when I started drinking. I was self-medicating from childhood issues that I had. And I had to remember who was I before I started partying and numbing out, trying to escape and dissociating, you know? And and I noticed that like the combat veterans that I knew who lost sight of who they were would go to alcohol, a lot of it, and they'd
Yeah.
be stuck in that loop of stuff they experienced in war, stuff that they wished they did, stuff that some of them wish they didn't do. Um, and they'd be looping, right? Shoulda, woulda, coulda. Like, what happened? What did I do wrong? I'm thinking of a buddy of mine specifically who laid this out, and we bonded over that, right? And so, it's important to not just look at how we need to stop certain addictions or stop self medication, but what's the pain underlying it. That's what therapy is
Yeah.
about. That's what psychology is about. And when you look at, so there's this beautiful word in psychology called sublimation. And sublimation is a concept where you take the angst that you would use to like drink alcohol, do drugs, fight somebody, whatever it is, and you channel it into a creative, productive
Yeah.
process. And that can be anything. I don't care if it's dancing, I don't care if it's pottery, CrossFit, jujitsu. I don't manufacturing guns for like I have a bunch of friends who love machining gun parts and putting
Yeah.
Cerakote on them and designing weapons of all sorts. Like whatever it is that gets you excited, go do that. And you can do it while you're in the military, but
Yeah.
especially when you're out, yeah, man, there's
No, that's
no
huge, man.
one size fits all.
Yeah, it's huge because so it, I think there's interesting takeaways from this, right? So like I came in the Navy like 6 days after I graduated high school, right?
Mm.
So like graduated high school a week later, I was in boot camp, and that was a hilarious conversation with my mom. I hadn't been living at home for like 2 years anyways, but I just rolled by like, hey mom, I'm going to boot camp in like 6 days. But as a kid, I was always really right brained, right? Like music, I
Yeah.
like to watch movies,
Yep.
I like to draw. Now, I read some stuff about stereotypes and stuff like that in the intro to your book, and
Yeah, for sure.
in my culture growing up,
What's up,
um,
Brad? My buddy just showed up.
oh, what's up, Brad? And
He's a
so
EMT. Awesome dude.
all the stuff, some of the stuff I like to do would get looked down upon, from people my age in my group. Um, and then I immediately go in the Navy, and I was like, there's not a lot of time to really paint. There's not a lot of time to, listen to music's one thing. I even kept that kind of close to my chest because, like it, I couldn't just come out and be like, yo, I really
I
love
get
Depeche
it. Yeah,
Mode.
yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like Depeche Mode freaking rocks, bro. Like if
Even
anyone
though
doesn't
you
like Depeche,
should, I get it.
y-
We feel like I
yeah,
can't
you know what
tell
I mean?
people,
And
man.
it's funny how you talk about how being authentic, because I think sometimes, like especially the junior people when they first come in the military, they lean really hard on where they're from, and they become these hyper versions of where they're from, right?
Yep.
And some
Yeah.
even play it up, right?
Yeah.
Because you become like strangely loyal to where you're from. It's really freaking weird. Um, it's like they always joke about the Benetton ads. Like there's one cowboy guy, there's like one dude in Dickies, and there's another, But
Yep.
I think it's important because like to still incorporate even of like you said to the sublimation. If I'm only going to be home that night for 4 hours, I should probably make one of those hours doing something I like to do and not drinking.
Yeah,
You know,
man.
if I like to draw, well, and you're doing a big project, well, you can only eat an elephant one bite at a time.
Right.
So if you dedicate an hour of that to yourself every night, and you're conscious about it,
Yeah.
you've done something for you. And even if it's only an hour, you got to acknowledge that, so at least I did an hour. And at the end of the
Yeah.
year, if you did it 52, you know, 5 times 52, you got a whole bunch of hours in for yourself, right? So
Yeah, man.
I think it's important. And then I think you hold on to that. And then, like you talked about the jujitsu stuff, how the white belts have 4 moves to get this done, and the black belts have 40 moves to get this done.
Mm.
Whatever it is you're interested in, if you keep at it, you'll eventually get to the point to where you're doing 40 moves in something you really, really care about. And, and then maybe you'll figure out, well, there's 50 moves I could do to this. And you can keep going
Yeah,
down that path. I
for
think that's a good
sure.
message to continue to do stuff. So Dan, talking about your book, um, I'm actually excited to get a copy and read it. I learned a lesson today. I'm going to start getting people's books ahead of time and read them before they show up. I think that would be beneficial. But we kind of do this on short notice. But do you have any plans in the future for anything that you can divulge or anything in the works now? Or are there any projects that you've done before that maybe we haven't addressed yet? And if so, would you like to share them and then how they benefit my community of veterans and everybody that watches?
I mean, we can talk about where things are going right now. So I'm actually in the middle of training for a couple different things. There's a one government position I'm training for, which is pretty cool. I won't disclose too much, but I'm also looking at the reserves. So I'm trying to get back in a tactical team environment. I realize how much I miss it already. Haven't even been out a year, but the military changed me, man. It really changed my mindset. It changed my interests. It changed my connection with others. And so I need to be a group around a group of just meat eaters, who are savage and strong. And there's so much we can go into there, but luckily I found some doors that are opening that are pretty rad. So I'm training for that. I've This book is because of people like you. There's so much love that I'm getting shown, and there's an opportunity. September is Suicide Awareness Month, and um, there's an opportunity for me to give a speech at an organization that's pretty rad. A lot of badasses are going to be there, military guys and gals. They're potentially I'm going to give a talk on suicidality and how to prevent it, how to address it.
Yeah.
Um, little little mentorship opportunities. I'd like to write a couple more books, to be honest. One on physical fitness and mental health. Another, sort of a deeper dive into the psychological and neuropsychological applications of leadership. Um, I could ramble for days on that stuff,
Oh
and
no,
so I'm gonna,
you're right.
yeah, I just there's so much that's kind of pouring out of me now that I've found people like you out there and other veterans who are saying, "Hey, this is worth a discussion. I want a dialogue," right? Because when I wrote this book, it was me venting, right? It was me trying to get through this kind of labyrinth in my mind of what's ideal leadership. Um, what could I do to help the Joes that are hurting, right? And now that the book is out, um, I'm hearing from people who are saying, "Hey, like you have a seat at the table with me to talk about this, right?" And that's pumping me up. Like I'm easily motivated, especially when it means fostering that community, right, with service
Yeah.
members. That like sparks something in me. And so what I'm doing right now and what you this our relationship is a manifestation of is me leaning into that. I'm leaning into that pull. I don't know where it is, where it's going, where it's coming from. I
Yeah.
don't know what it is, but I know that there's something there. And dude, as long as we're having these discussions and people are sending these invites, I'm all about it, man. And
Yeah.
so ideally, I'd like to be an author of several more books. I'm recording the audiobook of this one as well,
Nice.
and then I do want to get back in uniform in some capacity.
Awesome,
Uh,
man.
yeah, so that's kind of what's going on.
Yeah. I think it's you talk about opening doors and going back. I think you probably are receiving the reception you're receiving because it's one thing to sign up and boot camp and or officer
Mm.
candidate school, whatever you go to, right? Is shut up and do what you're told and discipline. And I get it.
Yeah.
Listen, I get it, man.
Uh,
Like I get it to I get it, right? Like it all leads up to when something happens in a moment. If you have an order that needs to be executed, you need to execute it because a lot of times in that kind of situation, time is of the essence, right? There's
yeah.
no time for dialogue. Now, the truth is that's probably 1% of the time. The rest of the
Hmm.
time we're working, right? You know, you might be able to ask a question like, "Yo, is this wrench the best wrench for this job, or is this?" You know what I mean? Like, and then a leader's like, actually, that's actually not the right wrench in accordance with the card. Let's go find the right wrench, right? Like, I'm glad you asked that question.
Hmm.
Um, but the whole like having your head on straight, quote unquote, thing
Hmm.
has not been a topic of discussion for a long time. And for those of us that, I joined in '93,
Hmm.
so I joined prior to September 11th, and I've often discussed how I've noticed a slight difference in the people that joined pre
Yeah.
September 11th and
Yep.
those that joined afterwards, and not good or bad, just a difference.
Hmm.
But a lot of us, like they talk about resiliency and all this other stuff, but a lot of us were resilient before we joined. You know what I mean? Like
Mm,
you had to be like in I think pre September 11th, you weren't sold on like this patriotic thing. You were kind of already patriotic because you joined the military, right?
mm,
But the military commercials were more like, yo, let's go do some cool stuff. You might die.
mm.
But if you don't, you get this sweet college deal, right?
Yeah.
And then after September 11th, there was a bunch of like, and I get it. But I think my whole point is like, you're getting a churn in this conversation because um, as an organization, you can only bottle stuff up so long before it explodes out,
Mm,
right? We inherently have difficult jobs. And I know there's a lot of, smack talking between what you guys would call MOSs and we call ratings or
right.
communities, right? There's a
Yeah.
lot of smack talking. But at the end of the day, if there's 300 of us stuck in a 500-foot metal box for 9 months when it was
One
supposed to be
team,
6
one
months,
fight, bro.
one team, one fight, baby,
Yeah,
right?
man.
It's
Heck yeah.
difficult situation, right? When you see the same people every freaking day for 9 months and your ship is only 66 feet wide, you're
Mm,
gonna have problems. Stuff's gonna be out there, right? So we have to be able to discuss this in a healthy manner. I got to be
yep.
able to look you in the face, be like, I don't like you, bro. I don't like you,
But we're gonna
but
work together.
we're gonna work together. We're gonna
Hey,
figure
we're
this
gonna
out,
get the
right?
mission done.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and so I think it's a good conversation because you have the small end of that, but then you got the really deep, heavy end of that, right? Because there's
Yeah.
people that have had to do very difficult, very hard things that affect them the rest of their lives with people they don't really dig or people they don't really
Yeah.
trust, right?
Yeah.
And that could be up and down the chain of command. You don't trust the junior person because they've
Mm,
demonstrated stuff. You don't trust the senior person. So I think that's probably why you're getting a lot of traffic on your stuff because it's an authentic, like you said, this is my authentic take on this. This is my take.
mm,
And what I took away from the intro part of your book is this the honesty to say, I served this period of time. I served in a non deployable unit
mm,
because I think that's a huge community that gets lost in the military, right? And we talk about this in the watch community all the time. You all you hear about are the 1% jobs. They're the ones that get the watch deals. They're the ones that get the
mm.
ambassadorships. They're the ones that do this. And dude, there is 99% of other people who do stuff, maybe not as dangerous all the time, but there is a level of danger and there's a level of difficulty, there's a level of hardship to that job.
Mm,
Because if there wasn't, everyone would do it. And
mm.
everyone doesn't do it. So like
Yeah.
to serve 4 years honorably and roll out, to serve 8 years honorably and roll out is a huge freaking thing because like you said, it changes your life. And I always joke about
Yeah.
I only miss a couple of things about the Navy. You ready? And I think this probably is across all branches of service. Number one, I miss waking up to breakfast being made.
Mm,
It's the greatest thing in the world because it's the one meal you can't screw up
mm,
because you wake up hungry, you got eggs, you got some meat,
mm.
you got some coffee. Like if you can't get down with that, I don't know what to tell you. You may have problems that we can't help. And number two, I personally miss occasionally being able to go outside and know I'm on a part of the ocean that a handful of people have ever been at before,
Mm,
right? And I've been reminded about how small I am in the grand scheme of things.
mm. It's
I,
cool, man.
I think it's great that that you want to go back to that because for it to call you back, there's a lot of us here that can't go back that
Mm,
would in 2 seconds,
mm,
right? We would in 2 seconds. And so I think it's going to be interesting to watch your journey of, what comes in the future with your book and this journey down mental health and your experience with it and how you can improve that space, right? And then also, your journey back into service because I think that's another thing a lot of people forget that it is service, right? Are there personal motivations? Yes, but it's service, right? You're going to be serving us. You're going to be serving, your brothers and sisters in uniform still. And I think it's just going to add more and more to this book that you wrote and whatever comes out of that down the road because it's going to be a pretty unique perspective you're going to have, I think.
mm.
And I know me for one, I'm interested in kind of in following it and keeping in touch and stuff like that. But
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks. I appreciate the compliment. Yeah, it's a doozy, man. Leadership and just struggling with the ego and trying to grow and be the best person I could be. to my just
Yeah.
as an individual, right? And seeing the organization benefit. It's these discussions are huge. They're really helpful, and yeah,
Yeah. You just
definitely want to
remember,
have some.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I definitely want to have one podcast episode where maybe we can come up with a series of questions I have, like how would an NCO perceive all these things that I'm hearing as an officer, and then for you to kind of like read between the lines on that. Like I'm being told to do this, this, and this as an officer, right? And then you can translate, okay, as an NCO, this is what I'm seeing. Like it'd
Oh,
be
yeah.
really cool to have that perspective. That would help me actually process some stuff that I'm still kind of hung up on, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm down. We could do it any day you
Yeah.
want because it's an interesting thing too, because I think that conversation go two ways, right? Because a lot of times, like, so I don't know how many Mustang officers you've worked with, but I've worked with quite a few, and I work with quite a
Mm-hmm.
few now, retired ones, and we joke a lot about that stuff. And but the truth is, like I tell those guys, you guys hear conversations amongst officers that I'm not getting 75% of that information.
Mm.
So it's
Right.
imperative for you to be able to translate that down to me,
Yep.
so I understand. Right? Let me trust me enough to give me the dirt.
Yep.
And trust me enough to go tell the guys and the ladies. I'm not going to tell them. I'm not going to sell them the whole farm. And I'm sure as hell not going to go down and be like, well, you know, Lieutenant so and so said this. I'm not going to say that. I'm like, this is what we're doing,
Yep.
and I'll know why, right?
Mm.
And then maybe like my E6s or whoever, I pull them aside. I'm like, yo, this is the deal. This is why we're doing this. And they'll be like, okay. And then I'll tell them. And if you tell any of the guys, I'm gonna hem you up, like this.
Mm.
You know what I mean? I'm trusting you with this. But I think that's important because it's all expectations, right? We
Yeah.
set the expectations for the level of communication we're gonna have, right? And for you even
Yeah.
saying like it'd be cool to do an episode like that,
Yeah.
dude.
The
Some
why is so
officers,
important. You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
I love giving the why to the Joes, but then am I being too transparent? Am I saying too much? Because to me, I'm like, dude, if you're man, I don't want to get into it right now because
No,
then
no.
we'll go over. But the just
I'll tell you what, man.
the
It's a
stuff you do
measuring
in the
cup.
field, it's oof,
Yeah, it's a measuring cup, right?
gets
And
complex.
and the important things to remember are A, you can never make anyone let them you can never make anyone let you lead them. They will only let you lead them if you earn that. Period.
Mm,
You can show up and say you're their leader, and they might even like if you say walk forward, they're going to walk forward, but you ain't leading them,
right.
right? You have to earn that. Number 2,
Yeah.
right? And that involves a measuring cup. Over time, you will determine. I would always say err on the side of less information immediately.
Mm,
In the immediate one, give them the bare bones of what they need to know, and then kind of see what they do with that. Because I'll put it to you this way: this will be my last leadership. I don't want to take up your time. In a group of 10 people, you got 2 superstars, you got 6 fence riders, and you got 2 you know what's on the at the bottom,
mm,
right? It's the truth. It's an unpopular statement, but not everybody's a superstar, right? There's just
mm,
not. If that was the case, we'd all have $1 billion and six pack abs and all this. Anyways, your only job as a leader is to get those 2 people that are at the top to pull those 6 in the middle towards them, so you can accomplish the mission. Now that's complicated
mm.
because you got to know what motivates
Yep.
all 10 people,
Yeah.
right?
Motivation's
And
huge.
you know what I mean?
Mm,
And it's like, and if you can do that and meet their goals while accomplishing the mission first and explain that to them, it's like, hey, you may not get your degree the 3 years on this ship. You might work your way towards it. You may not
mm,
finish it because we got to get this ship from point A to point B,
yeah.
and we're going to have deployments and stuff. But it doesn't mean you can't accomplish some of it because it's better than doing nothing. And I think that's,
Bro, we should have like a
yeah,
6 hour
we
podcast on
will.
this, man. I have so many questions for you, and
Yeah,
yeah, it'd be cool, especially
we
if I
will.
am considering going back in. Like, and I love this is what I really appreciate about the veteran community is that there's so much wisdom. It's like oral tradition in the generations of old, like ancient traditions. Everything was oral tradition. I think that's how our brains are still designed, man. Just
Yeah.
hearing you speak and then getting to stop you and ask you, but what about this? And what about I mean, there's so much richness to that, you know. And
Yeah.
again, I'm passionate about it. That's why I wrote the book. And I want to give this gift to anybody else going in because the soldiers, the sailors, airmen, everyone's going to benefit. The Marines, like everyone will benefit if we have smarter leaders and people who
Yeah.
are motivated to know more about each other. So Oh, I get really like on the
Yeah.
edge of
No,
my
no, you're
seat
right.
about this, so I'm
And
gonna.
the crazy part is like you don't even have to like 10% of my my message. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Because there's so many people out there with such vast different experiences that
Yep. So many
have
different
learned
opinions,
lessons that we
so many
can't even.
different
Yeah,
perspectives,
man.
dude.
Man, it's crazy, bro.
It's
It's
complex.
actually it's like
Yeah, so that's why I need to like oof, turn it back down,
yeah.
like because I could rant for days on this, bro.
Oh no, no, but I appreciate it. And I mean, and this is, what I try to have on this podcast is, especially with the interviews, right? Like, yeah, you're Dan, and you have this experience and you wrote this cool book, but I mean, that's a tip of the iceberg, right? I want people to
Mhm.
go check out Backpack to Rucksacks. I want people to go check out
Thank you.
combatpsych.com. Um, I'll put all the links in the show notes, and it's not an affiliate link. I'm not getting anything for it. I mean, if Dan sells a book, he makes some money. More power to him. I want him to.
Appreciate it, man.
Dan's actually inspired me to write a book, so I've started actually doing some notes.
Do
Um,
it.
you know what I mean? Screw it, bro. Why not? You know what I mean? Like, I'll leave. I'll just put it in paperback,
You're
and
leaving a legacy behind, man. Leave it
yeah,
for the
you know what I
kiddos,
mean.
dude.
Do what you got to do. But Dan, do you have any parting shots? Anything you like to plug? Any message you like to give anybody
The only
before we
thing
punch out?
I like to end with, man, is and my buddy JP Lane, he was a combat engineer. He got blown up by a 200-pound IED, lost both of his legs. And when people see him, they're just like running up to him, like, "Thank you for your service. Like, this is, oh my gosh, you know." And he's got such a big heart. He looks at him and says, "You're worth it." And I told him, I was like, JP, I gotta steal that from you, bro. That's
Oh
brilliant. So I'm
wow,
gonna give him credit. But I would say to anybody in the military, any veterans out there, any human being really, but especially, those in uniform, you're worth it. Whatever you're going through, look towards self-enrichment, because the stronger you are, the smarter you are, the better you are, the more physically fit in every way, better yourself. The organization you're a part of, the unit, the team is going to benefit. You're going to be more dependable. You're going to be more reliable. You will be more resilient. So
yeah,
start with you being worth it, and watch how that trickles out to those around you. Because the guys and girls around you they're going to feel that, and you're going to inspire them, and you'll set a trend in motion that's going to allow health, mental
yeah,
health, and our troops deserve that, man.
yeah. They're the greatest resource that they have, and they don't realize it sometimes.
Yep.
There's strength in numbers, and you just got to get to know each other in
Hmm.
order to be stronger. I mean, it's so simple at times, but sometimes it's hard to see the trees through the forest.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
I hear you. Well, Dan, I want to say thank you for coming on the show. You have
Dude,
an
thank you,
open
man. This
invitation
was
to come
awesome.
back. Yeah, open invitation to come back anytime you want to. And I want to shout out to Eric from Rico's Watches podcast. Eric put us together. I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you to my
Thank you, Eric.
My Canadian brother up there riding a moose. And you know, no, I'm just kidding. He's not right. I mean, maybe he did write. I don't know. Anyways, but I want to say thank you, Dan, and thank you to Eric for putting this together. And for those of you, again, I invite you to go check out combatpsych.com. Check out the book Backpack to Rucksack. And Dan will definitely have you on again. And I just want to include everyone. Have a nice evening. Dan, if you want to say goodbye, you can. And then
Yeah, thanks. Bye, everyone. Appreciate it.
and everyone remember at watchrolling.com, you make the watch. The watch doesn't make you.